The brass cylinder of the lock didn't even click. It just spun loose in my hand, a cold, greasy circle of metal that told me everything before the door even opened. I stood on the granite steps of the Whitmore estate, the midday heat baking the back of my neck, holding 2 black canvas duffel bags that someone else had packed for me. My boots were strapped to the side of one, the soles dirty from a winter I apparently wasn't allowed to spend here anymore. The heavy oak door creaked back exactly 4 inches. The brass security chain was drawn tight, a thick bar of metal catching the light. Through the gap, my mother-in-law, Evelyn Whitmore, looked at me with the same dry, administrative expression she used when declining a shipping invoice. Behind her, standing on the landing of the grand staircase, was my wife, Clara. She was holding a tall glass of white wine, looking down at her phone, her face completely empty. Next to her stood Preston, her childhood friend, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his linen trousers. He didn't look away. He just watched me like I was a delivery driver who had brought the wrong order. "Julian," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into that quiet, cultivated register that she used to signal an unpleasant necessity. "I think we have reached the natural limit of this arrangement. The bags on the porch contain your clothing and your personal files. We have already taken the liberty of changing the security codes for the main gate and the side entrances." My ribs ached as I took a breath. 3 weeks ago, I had been in the intensive care unit after pulling their main logistics manager out of a burning warehouse down at the docks, saving 80% of their seasonal inventory in the process. I still had the medical tape residue on my collarbone. "Evelyn," I said, keeping my voice level because screaming on a porch on Beaumont Hill only makes you look like the monster they want you to be. "Where is my father's watch?" "The gold one on the dresser." Clara didn't look up from her phone. She took a slow sip of her wine and turned her back, walking toward the upper gallery. Preston followed her, his leather loafers silent on the Persian runner. "Everything that belongs to you is in those bags," Evelyn said, her eyes shifting to the driveway behind me, checking if the neighbors were watching. "I suggest you take them before the afternoon security patrol makes their rounds. Our family has been very patient with your transition, Julian, but Arthur and I agree that a professional logistics consultant should have been able to secure his own lodging by now. This household needs partners, not dependents." A partner. I had spent 2 years working 18-hour days to pull their family shipping company out of a technical bankruptcy, putting $85,000 of my own cash into renovating the old brick stables on their property so Clara and I would have our own place. I looked at the brass chain. I looked at the woman holding the door. I didn't argue. I didn't try to kick the door in, though my boots were heavy enough to do it. I simply picked up the 2 duffels, walked down the 6 granite steps, and sat down on the stone retaining wall near the driveway. My phone was in my hand. My fingers were stiff, but I knew the number by heart. "Dad," I said when the line picked up on the second ring. It happened. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling in the background. My father, Thomas Vance, didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I needed a place to sleep. He was a retired county surveyor and land title examiner who spent 30 years watching the wealthy families of the valley buy ground they couldn't afford with money they hadn't earned. "Where are you?" Thomas asked. "The driveway," I said. "On the retaining wall." "Stay right there," he said. "Do not leave the property line. I am 20 minutes away." I hung up. The sun was hot, burning through my linen shirt, making the scars on my shoulder itch. Across the street, the gardener at the Sterling estate paused his lawnmower to look at me. I didn't look down. I sat on my duffels and did what I have done since I was 22 years old, which is run numbers. To understand how a man ends up on a stone wall with his life in 2 bags, you have to understand the Whitmores. Every small valley has its royalty, the kind of people whose name is stamped on the municipal reservoir and the library wing. In Blackwood Pines, that was the Whitmores. They had owned the local freight terminal since the late 50s. They had the 4-bedroom federal-style house on the hill, the gravel drive that crunched just right when you drove up it, and a reputation for philanthropy that was mostly just a way to write off their club memberships. I grew up 4 miles away in a house with a concrete porch and a single maple tree in the front yard. My dad, Thomas, was the kind of man who measured his life in iron pins and property deeds. He was not a warm man, but he was a permanent one. When I was 12, I asked him why we didn't have a fence like the Whitmores, with the brass lanterns on the stone pillars. Thomas had looked up from his drafting table. His reading glasses slid down his nose. "Because those lanterns are held up by 3 different bank loans, Julian," he said. "Never buy a gate you can't pay cash to lock." I didn't believe him then. I was young, and I wanted the gravel drive. I wanted the tall windows that stayed lit until midnight. When I met Clara at a regional transport conference 5 years ago, I thought I had found my way into that light. She was beautiful in a way that didn't require effort, a quiet, simple elegance that made the cheap plastic chairs of the conference hall look like museum pieces. She listened to me talk about regional supply lines with an intensity that I mistook for respect. We were married within 12 months. We had a small ceremony at the municipal rose garden, which was the only thing my dad agreed to attend. Evelyn had wanted the country club, but I had insisted on paying for my half of the wedding, and my half didn't cover 6-course dinners for 200 people we didn't know. "If you let them pay for the flowers, Julian," Thomas had warned me the night before the wedding, "they will own the dirt you bury them in." I had laughed it off. I was 29, successful enough with my own consulting business, and convinced that love was a solvent that could melt any ledger. We moved into the east wing of the main house because Arthur Whitmore, Clara's father, had suffered a minor stroke that winter, and the family business was showing the first signs of dry rot. The freight terminal was losing contracts to larger national carriers. The trucks were old, the drivers were leaving, and the payroll was being met with personal credit lines. "It's just for a year," Clara had whispered to me, our first night in that cold, high-ceilinged bedroom. "We will help them get back on their feet, and then we will build our own place on the south pasture." I believed her. I was an engineer by training and a business fixer by trade. I saw their rotting company not as a warning, but as a project. I rolled up my sleeves and went to work on the Whitmore freight ledger. Within 6 months, I had cut their fuel overhead by 20%, renegotiated their insurance premiums, and secured a 3-year contract with the state agricultural cooperative that kept 30 of their flatbeds moving every day. I didn't ask for a salary. I was her husband. I was part of the family. But Evelyn Whitmore's ledger didn't work like mine. On our first autumn in the house, she knocked on our door holding a leather-bound book with gilt edges. She sat on our sofa, adjusted her pearls, and explained the estate contribution. "Every member of this household must do their part, Julian," she said, her voice warm as tea and sharp as a razor. "The maintenance on the grounds, the heating oil, the staff who clear the snow, it comes to $2,500 a month for your wing." I looked at the ledger. There were columns for every year going back to Arthur's grandfather. "I pay for my own office downtown, Evelyn," I said, "and I am currently working 40 hours a week for Whitmore Freight, without a draw." Evelyn had smiled, that small, pitying curve of the lips that made you feel like you had used the wrong fork at dinner. "The business is your future, Julian, but the house is our present. We must preserve the standard. Surely a successful consultant can manage his share of the family's comfort." I looked at Clara. She was looking out the window, her fingers tracing the frame. "It's just the estate cost, Julian," she said softly. "We don't want to be a burden." So I paid. $2,500 every month, wired directly from my consulting firm's account to the Whitmore Estate Fund. I also did their business tax filings for free. I balanced their family household accounts. I became the clerk of the castle, the man who stayed up until 2 a.m. finding the money to pay for the hand-delivered wine, and the landscaping crew that mowed the 3-acre lawn twice a week. And then there was the carriage house. At the edge of the property, past the formal gardens, stood an old brick stable built in the late 19th century. It had been used for storage since the 50s, filled with broken wicker furniture, old holiday decorations, and family archives that were rotting from the damp. The first time I walked through it with Clara, I saw the potential. The brick was solid. The oak beams overhead were 30 inches thick and untouched by rot. "We could turn this into our home," I said, pointing to the high loft. "We could put a kitchen down here, keep the original ironwork on the doors, and have our own entrance off the county lane. We wouldn't even have to use the main gate." Clara had clung to my arm. "Oh, Julian, yes. It would be ours. Really ours." I went to Evelyn the next morning. I asked for a lease, a deed, some piece of paper that would give us legal title to the 3/4 of an acre the stable sat on. Evelyn had looked genuinely wounded. "Paperwork, Julian. Between family? This is Whitmore land. It has been in our name for 3 generations. We would never sell a square inch of it. But it is your home. Fix it up. Think of it as your gift to the family's estate, and our gift to you. I was 31. I was tired of living in the East Wing where I could hear Arthur's oxygen machine through the wall and Evelyn's voice instructing the maid on the stairs at 7 every morning. I hired a local builder named Marcus, a friend of my father's who had spent 40 years doing heavy timber framing. Julian, Marcus had said on the 3rd day of the demolition, as we were clearing out 40 boxes of old garden catalogs. You got a contract for this work? No, I said, hauling a rotted timber to the dumpster. It's family land. Marcus had stopped his crowbar, leaning against the red brick wall. He spat into the dust. My dad always said, if you don't own the dirt, you don't own the roof, he said. The Whitmores are famous for letting other people do the digging. I didn't listen. I spent $85,000 of my own personal savings over the next 12 months. I bought the hand-fired brick from the old kiln in the next county to match the original walls. I paid $12,000 for a custom steel staircase that spiraled up to the loft. I spent 3 weeks of my own weekends sanding the oak beams until my shoulders felt like they were filled with broken glass. I kept every invoice. I kept every receipt. I didn't do it because I was suspicious. I did it because I am a bookkeeper and an engineer. I don't know how to live without keeping the record. Every nail, every gallon of linseed oil, every hour of Marcus's labor went into a green accordion folder in my office desk. The stable was finished in May. It was beautiful. The light came through the 12-foot arched windows and hit the polished concrete floors I had poured myself. I had set up my desk in the corner, looking out over the valley. We were supposed to move our things in on the 1st of June, but on the last Tuesday of May, I was down at the Whitmore Freight Terminal on the River Road. We had 30 trucks scheduled to depart with the summer produce harvest when an electrical transformer on the old warehouse wall blew. The sparks hit a pile of dry pallets, and within 4 minutes, the entire south wall of the depot was on fire. The drivers were running. The office staff was screaming on the gravel. I knew that if the main server room in the basement went down, we would lose every digital routing record, every client contract, and every payroll file for 60 families. The company would be dead before the fire trucks arrived. I didn't think about the Whitmores. I didn't think about the castle on the hill. I thought about the drivers who had kids in school, the guys I had spent 2 years working with to keep their jobs. I went into the smoke. I got the servers down. I carried 3 70-pound backup units up the basement stairs while the rafters were dripping burning tar onto my neck. On my last trip, a roof support gave way. It hit my left shoulder, throwing me down 6 concrete steps. I woke up in the county hospital with 3 broken ribs, a level 2 concussion, and 2nd-degree burns on my left forearm. Clara came to see me the next day. She stayed 15 minutes. She sat on the edge of the plastic chair, her eyes darting to the hallway, her fingers twisting her leather purse strap. You shouldn't have gone in there, Julian, she said. It was insured. No, it wasn't, Clara, I said, each word feeling like a knife in my lung. The insurance on that warehouse was 60 days past due because your mother wanted to pay for the spring garden tour instead of the commercial premium. I had to let the policy lapse to a skeleton coverage. If we lost those servers, we lost the company. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The company is fine, she said. Arthur's old friend Preston is helping him with the restructuring now. He says they can get a federal development loan if we refile as an historic family enterprise. Preston's family owned the local bank that had been trying to foreclose on the Whitmore freight yard for 5 years. He had been Clara's fiancé before her father's first stroke, a man with teeth too white and a voice that sounded like it had been polished with a chamois cloth. They kept me in the clinic for 2 weeks. Clara didn't come back. When I called her, the phone went straight to voicemail. On the day I was discharged, I had to take a $15 cab back to the estate. And that brings us back to the stone wall. A shadow fell over my boots. I looked up. My father's blue pickup truck, a 15-year-old diesel with rusted wheel wells and a clean cabin, had pulled up to the curb. The engine rumbled, a deep, heavy vibration that made the gravel near the gate jump. The passenger door opened, and Roger Miller stepped out. Roger was 68, had a face like a walnut, and had been the lead real estate and corporate attorney for the local farmers union since the Carter administration. He was carrying a thick black leather binder under his arm. Thomas Vance stepped down from the driver's side. He didn't look at the main house. He didn't look at the 2 duffel bags. He walked straight to me, put a heavy hand on my good shoulder, and squeezed once. "You got your papers?" Thomas asked. "In the green folder," I said, pointing to the duffel. "Get it," he said. I unzipped the bag, pulled out the green accordion folder, and handed it to Roger. The attorney didn't sit down. He laid the folder on the hood of my dad's truck and began flipping through the invoices, his thumb flicking the corners with a dry, rhythmic sound. $85,000 in materials and third-party labor, Roger murmured, his pen tracing a line on his yellow legal pad. Receipts matched the bank drafts, Marcus's signature on the masonry work. "This is clean, Julian. What are we doing, Dad?" I asked, looking from the truck to the stone gate posts. "We are going to have a conversation about the rent," Thomas said. He didn't explain. He just turned and walked up the gravel drive, his boots crunching loud and steady. Roger followed him, his leather briefcase swinging against his knee. I stood up, my ribs screaming as I lifted myself, and followed them. Evelyn was still on the porch. She had been watching from behind the screen door, and as we reached the steps, she came out again, her face white with a sudden, sharp anger that she couldn't quite cover with her committee voice. "Thomas," she said, looking at my father like he was a weed that had grown through her flagstones, "this is private property. Julian has been asked to leave." "I am aware," Thomas said. He stopped at the bottom step, his hands tucked into the pockets of his canvas jacket. "And we are leaving. But before we go, we need to settle the balance on the note." Evelyn let out a short, high laugh. "The note? What are you talking about? There is no note. If Julian is claiming we owe him for his help with the business, he was a member of this family. His services were voluntary." "I am not talking about the freight company, Evelyn," Thomas said. He reached into Roger's briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, photocopied from the county land registry office. "I am talking about the second mortgage on this house, the one Arthur took out 6 years ago with the Regional Development Trust to pay for the warehouse expansion." Evelyn's hand went to her collar, her fingers closing around her pearls. "That is a commercial bank matter," she said. "It has nothing to do with you or your son." "It didn't," Thomas said, "until the bank decided the risk was too high and offered the paper to the secondary market. I bought that note 4 years ago, Evelyn, for $240,000. Cash." The porch went completely quiet. The only sound was the wind in the hemlocks at the side of the lawn. I looked at my father. He had never told me. For 4 years, while I had been sitting at that cherry wood table paying $2,500 a month for the privilege of being their tenant, my dad had been holding the paper on the roof over our heads. "Why?" I whispered. Thomas didn't look back at me. "Because I knew who you were marrying, Julian," he said, his voice dropping into that hard, flat surveyor's tone. "And I knew that when a Whitmore offers you a seat at their table, they always expect you to pay for the wood it's made of. I wanted to make sure we owned the ground under your chair." Roger stepped forward, sliding his reading glasses up his nose. "The note was structured with a 90-day default clause, Mrs. Whitmore," the attorney said. "As of the 1st of this month, the estate account is $95,000 behind on the principal amortization. We sent the formal notice of acceleration to your corporate address 3 weeks ago. It was signed for by a Preston Vance, or rather Preston Sterling. The front door opened all the way now. Arthur Whitmore stood in the entryway, his face gray, his breathing heavy. He was holding on to the doorframe with both hands, his knuckles yellow from the pressure. "Thomas," Arthur rasped. "We are old friends. We went to school together." "You went to school on the hill, Arthur," Thomas said. "I went to school in the valley. We weren't friends then, and we aren't friends now. You owe $95,000 on the principal. I am calling the entire balance of the mortgage due, $210,000, within 30 days. Clara had come out onto the porch now. She looked at me, her eyes wide, the empty wine glass gone from her hand. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking. "Talk to him. This is our home." "No, Clara," I said, the pain in my ribs suddenly feeling very distant and clean. "This is your mother's ledger. I was just the guest who paid the bill. We didn't stay on the porch. We walked into the grand entry hall, the 3 of us, leaving Evelyn and Clara standing in the heat. Arthur sat down in the leather chair in his study, his hands shaking as he reached for his glasses. Preston was already there, sitting behind Arthur's mahogany desk, his laptop open. He looked up as we entered, his eyes scanning Roger's leather binder with a sudden professional caution. "This is highly irregular, Preston said, his voice trying for a dominant, legal tone that didn't quite land. Groundwork Holdings is the registered owner of that note. Groundwork Holdings is my dad's surveyor office, I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him, the one with the single desk and the green filing cabinet. Preston looked at Arthur. Then he looked at the legal papers Roger laid on the desk. "We can refinance," Preston said, his fingers tapping the edge of his computer. "The bank will clear this within 60 days. "The bank won't clear a $5 overdraft for Whitmore Freight right now, Preston," I said. "I spent the last 3 years keeping your credit lines alive. I know exactly how much blood is left in this business. There isn't any. You are running on the brand name, and the brand name doesn't pay the interest." Roger laid a second sheet of paper on the desk. It was my green folder's contents, distilled into a single, devastating page of accounting. "Unjust enrichment," Roger said. $85,000 in direct capital improvements to the carriage house, paid for by Julian Vance under a verbal promise of life tenancy. We have the contractor's logs, the material invoices, and the bank transfers. We are filing the civil claim alongside the foreclosure notice. Arthur looked at his wife, who had followed us into the room and was standing near the fireplace, her face completely empty of its former grace. "Evelyn," Arthur said, his voice very small, "is this true? Did you take his key?" Evelyn didn't answer. She looked out the window, her jaw set so tight the muscles in her neck were white cords. I looked at Clara. She was standing in the doorway, her hands tucked into her sleeves, looking at the floor. She looked like she was 12 years old again, waiting for someone else to tell her what her name was worth. I stood up. I didn't feel the ribs anymore. I felt like a man who had walked out of a heavy fog into the clean, cold light of a November morning. "Here is how we close the account," I said, looking at Arthur. I did not look at Clara. I did not look at Preston. "You will sign the release for my tools and my office equipment today," I said. "You will agree to an uncontested divorce with 0 marital property claims. I keep my business, my name, and my personal assets. In exchange, my dad will sell the note back to the regional cooperative bank at par. They will give you 60 days to clear the property before they list it." Arthur looked at the paper. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen Roger offered him. "And the carriage house?" Evelyn asked, her voice cracking for the first time. "The $85,000? "Think of it as my contribution to the family's standards, Evelyn," I said. "I am leaving the key on the porch. You can use it to store your archives." We walked out. The sun was still hot on the driveway. Thomas didn't say anything as we reached the truck. He picked up my 2 duffel bags, threw them into the bed of the pickup, and slammed the tailgate shut. "Get in," he said. We drove down the hill, the diesel engine roaring against the grade. As we passed through the stone gate posts, I looked back once in the side mirror. The red brick stables were visible through the hemlocks, the loft window catching the afternoon sun like a coin. I had paid $85,000 and 3 years of my life to learn one simple piece of math. A name is just a lease on a house you don't own. My father was silent until we reached the river road, the truck humming steady at 50 miles an hour. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes on the asphalt. "Yeah," I said, leaning my head against the cold glass of the window. "I am clean." "Good," Thomas said. "Let's go get some meatloaf." It has been 18 months since that afternoon. The Whitmore estate was sold last winter to a commercial developer who is turning the 4-bedroom house into an upscale bed and breakfast. The red brick stables are now a tasting room for a local vineyard. Clara and her mother live in a 2-bedroom rental near the country club, where Evelyn still chairs the historical society but has to walk to the meetings because the Mercedes was sold to cover the legal fees from their corporate restructuring. My business, Vance Logistics, is currently operating out of a renovated warehouse near the freight terminal. We have 12 employees now. The cooperative contract we secured is still our largest account, and my keyring has only 2 keys on it now. One for my office, and one for a small 2-bedroom bungalow with a concrete porch and a single maple tree in the front yard. My dad and I built the fence ourselves last spring. We didn't use stone. We didn't put any brass lanterns on the pillars. We used simple cedar posts, set deep in the ground, paid for with cash we had in our pockets. It doesn't look like a castle, but when the wind comes through the valley in October, the gate doesn't shake at all. That is my story. 2 duffels on the stones, a blue truck, and a bookkeeper who finally learned how to read his own ledger. If you are currently paying the estate tax on someone else's name, hear me. The price of that seat never stops rising. Leave the key on the railing. The ground is waiting for you at the bottom of the hill. Tell me in the comments what you would have done when that door opened on the chain. And subscribe. I will see you in the next one.